Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the only first listen new music review show hosted by a French professor immediately after leaving the gym. So today I'm going to be reviewing an album by King Krule, King Krule, Man Alive. And there are so many different ways of approaching this art rock album. I don't even really know where to start. I had all these different ideas in my head, and I finally landed on one, and I'll get there in a second. But let me tell you some of the aborted ideas that I had for how to approach this fascinating, self-indulgent, sometimes difficult to listen to, but ultimately very engaging experiment in sound and music. First off, I had his name. Right? I don't know anything about this guy. I'd basically never heard of him before, so I'm not some expert on him, I saw his name and I thought King Krule, the character from the Donkey Kong series. Kind of like this big alligator guy who has an overpowered move in Smash Brothers. I thought, all right, that's kind of cool, I guess. And then I read a biography of this guy, and where it said, actually, this is in reference to the Elvis movie, King Krule. It's actually short for that. Now that's either, ooh, sorry, I'm shaking the table a lot here. That's either some kind of copyright fake, or he really means it. Either way, I thought, this is going a little bit too far, either way, it's kind of a lame name. Either way, it's sort of trying a little bit too hard to be cool and different. When really, just the name King Krule is kind of a cool name on its own. So I thought maybe I could sort of study it as a cross between Elvis and Donkey Kong. But that didn't quite work. The way that this is such an art rock album is extremely clear. And that made me think of a couple things. One, it reminded me of being in college, and there being these like super cool, hot art guys who would like put on shows at the college gallery, and like they were so pained and tortured and hot, that I'd always just be really jealous of those guys. Because on one hand, I would dismiss them because they were like, more attractive than me, and girls who I liked them. But also like I would dismiss them because like there's no way they could be making good art. And in a way, this guy is so hip and upcoming and young and all that stuff. It has that kind of feel of like an art gallery opening for that guy that you're just like, that you can't even really judge his art fairly. But to take it another way, it actually reminded me of a different art experience in college where I got to go to the Brooklyn Museum and see the Sensations exhibit. So this was an exhibit that was put on by this super rich guy in England who owned a lot of art by a lot of the new, young, hip artists from England. And this caused a huge scandal in America. Mayor Giuliani tried to shut it down. This is before he turned into Nosferatu. He tried to shut it down because it was, it has a Mother Mary out of cow dung and had a lot of great Damien Hirst pieces, the shark all cut up. And I remember going there and I had this feeling of like, okay, everyone's told me this is important. And if I've ever heard of King Krule, I've heard people I respect like Kanye talking about how good he is and how important he is. So I kind of went into this album expecting something very important and very good. Much like when I went to that exhibit of the newest, hottest British artists that are going to shock and scandalize you. I had the feeling when I pressed play on the stream to this that I was entering that museum again. And much like with the kind of hot guy artist in college, it colored my view of it. Ultimately, though, the hot guy's art is actually pretty good. The Sensation exhibit was unbelievable. It's the best art exhibit I've ever been to. This guy, King Krule, King Krule, King Creole, whatever he is, has released an excellent album. I also compare it a little bit to Aphex Twin in the way that I don't think I'm going to listen to this on purpose very much. But I'm very happy that it exists. And I think that artists that I like more than this guy are going to take from him and make something great. The way that Radiohead took from Aphex Twin and made great music that is, in my opinion, much better than anything Aphex Twin ever made, but yet owes such a debt to Aphex Twin that to say that very sentence is kind of obscene and insulting. So it's my hope that this hot young artist guy who's releasing this music that's very avant-garde. There's no nods to pop. There's no efforts to make a dance track. There's like one song you can sort of dance to, but it's so depressing you can't really dance to it. It's great that it has this kind of exposure and that that Fantano reviewed it and that it's on the charts. The idea that art rock like this can make it, I think you have to remove the cynicism of walking into the gallery and saying, what is it that everyone likes? And instead, walk in and say, hey, what is it that everyone likes? You should be able to tell now by my thumbnail and by this image of Jean-Paul Sartre from the Existentialist coloring book, the real way that I'm going to approach this album. I'm going to be calling this album Nausea the Musical. Now let me explain. In order to do that, I want to actually play you the first song off the album. It's probably my favorite song, either the first song or the last song. And this is exemplary of the musical style. You have guitar, kind of a lazy, undistorted guitar. You have spoken word singing in between the two, sometimes rapping, but in general, it's just sort of a spoken word. No rhymes. The music feels like an excuse for the words. At a certain point later on in this song, not the part we're going to listen to, horns come in and it's just beautiful. Everything is so sparse. The only thing that's consistent is a kind of lazy guitar and a voice. But then when sometimes some drums are brought in or horns are brought in, it's like water in a desert. You're just like, oh, thank you. So I'm going to play you a little bit of this. You can hear his voice, his heavily thick British accent, which is, I think, probably why I thought of that Damien Hirst's show. But also you can hear the guitar and just the bizarreness of the construction of these songs. This is Cellular.
There's a television speaking to me. There's a French girl.
Okay, actually there's no guitar in that part of the song. You'll just have to take my word for it. There's almost always some nice kind of lazy guitar. Sometimes the guitar gets interesting. Like on the last track that I mentioned before, there's this great ominous guitar line that's brought in. It's just a single instance, and it's quite nice. But this song is what tipped me off to the existentialist nature of this album, and in particular, this book by Sartre. I took an old magic card and covered up the Durer's Melancholia, Revoke Existence. I thought that was pretty funny. So, what does this album have to do with the 20th century French existentialist? In this song, Cellular, it's all about having a television talking to him. And the television that he's talking about is his smartphone. There's a French girl talking to me in the palm of my hand. There's a massacre happening across the ocean in the palm of my hand. This is a very consistent theme throughout the album, in which he has these relationships to objects that are very conflicted and very confusing. He appears to be completely overwhelmed by his own existence and by the existence of things around him. That's the tone, much like Roquentin from Sartre's book. Now, if you don't know the plot of this book, there isn't much of a plot. The main reason that it's interesting and why it's called Nausea is because the lead character basically struggles with his own existence, his own passage from nothingness into being, although it was before Sartre wrote Being and Nothingness, still. And in it, there's this whole part where he starts to get nauseous by his awareness of the objects around him. The chestnut trees, the bench that he's sitting on. It fills him with this kind of dread. This dread that is ultimately about questioning the nature of why does he exist and what is existence. I believe this album is primarily trying to express that same question. The title of the album, Man Alive, I think hints at that. Much like Roquentin in Sartre's Nausea, he's constantly trying to talk about what it is to be alive. I actually initially thought that the title Man Alive was a reference to the great Simpsons joke, Man Alive! There's men alive in here! But I don't think so. On a second listen, the track Comet Face, he even says, at least the nausea is not too bad. So maybe this is intentional. Maybe King Krule has a whole bunch of interviews where he talks about how he wants to make a Sartre album. I don't know. I don't research what I talk about, unless I very specifically tell you that I do. So I'm not sure. But what I'm going to do is read you some of Sartre's words from here. I found some translations online that are fine. And if you're a fan of King Krule, if you're a fan of this album, I would say, wouldn't this fit in? Wouldn't this fit in to the album? Objects should not touch because they are not alive. You use them, put them back into place, you live among them, they are useful, nothing more. But they touch me. It's unbearable. I am afraid of being in contact with them as though they were living beasts. There's a telephone in my hand. A television talking to me in my hand. That's where we are here. That wasn't a good British impersonation. Another Sartre quote. I am alone in the midst of these happy, reasonable voices. All these creatures spend their time explaining, realizing happily that they agree with another. In heaven's name, why is it so important to think the same things all together? He keeps going. Another part of the book. My thought is me. That's why I can't stop. I exist because I think. I can't stop myself from thinking at this very moment. It's frightful. I exist. If I exist, it's because I'm horrified at existing. I am the one who pulls myself from the nothingness to which I aspire. This would fit perfectly in King Krule's lyrics. You must be like me. You must suffer in rhythm. I think you could have that as a subtitle to this album. Man alive, suffering in rhythm. And finally, this moment was extraordinary. I was there, motionless, paralyzed, plunged in a horrible ecstasy. I think this album is very much about horrible ecstasy. There's a track called Stoned Again. You should know by now that I'm very anti-drug in my life, although probably not really my music taste. But this is a song called Stoned Again, and it's not a happy song about being stoned. It's not really a sad song about being stoned. It's kind of an existential cry about the nature of being stoned. This sense of being in a horrible ecstasy. In general, this whole album follows this pattern. And like I said, it seems as though the music is often just an excuse for the words. At times when the music is good, it's excellent. Much like that last track I mentioned, much like the first one, Cellular. It's worth a listen, and you can sort of nod your head to it. But the best thing to do is just to listen to it and consider the fact that there is value in solipsism. If you don't know what solipsism is, it's gazing at your own belly button. That's the term for it, you know. And he spends a lot of time like talking about being in an airplane and thinking about like how he's up high and other people are down low. The second to last song, he just says, "What a life I lead." He is unabashedly just talking about himself and his life, going from Heathrow to JFK and whatever kind of strange existence he has as a popular art rock scenester. It's very strong. It's solipsistic, but it has to be. I think existentialism has to be solipsistic. Solipsistic? Solipsistic. It's hard to pronounce that word. You have to be gazing at your own belly button in order to make good existential art, because so much of it is about why do you exist as opposed to not existing, and what does your existence mean. So there's my review. I think it's worth a listen. I think it's an important album. I think it's great that there's art rock being made out there that's important. If I were 20 years younger and I heard this would be my favorite thing, and I'd listen to it all the time, and I'd try to freak out my friends by playing it for them, like, Skye, this is so lame, you don't really like this? I'm like, yeah, I do, I really like it. It's so cool, man, it's exactly how I feel. Like, what am I? You know, like, why am I here? I'm a little bit too old for that, but I'm glad that people are making that kind of music. We need it. Okay, until next time, for Jean-Paul, there's the camera.